Hey, good evening, everybody. Sorry for the late start. We were having too much fun chatting in the green room. But tonight I've got a longtime collector, longtime CAF member, and a person who's been in the business for quite some time. Greg Goldstein is going to be joining us. And this is really long overdue. Greg and I have emailed at different times over the last couple of years. And I don't know why it took me so long to ask him to be on the show, but I'm made up for that, and we've got a few hours to hang out with him this evening. And so, Greg, welcome to the show. Nice to have
Thanks,
you
Bill.
on.
Appreciate that. And no worries. You've got a lot of great art collectors and a lot of great art collections out there. So there was, this was apparently the time. So,
Exactly. It was funny. I think what reminded me was seeing a picture, something from San Diego, I believe. And I don't think it was before San Diego when we emailed to set it up, but it was something that popped up on my timeline, and I thought, gosh, why have I not had Greg on the show? So.
Well, did you happen to catch the 1975 picture of Greg at a Phil Seuling convention?
I may have. That does sound familiar.
So, the Milton Group's been doing a history of the direct market series, and I had a brief moment in that very beginning. So, picture me like one of the other scientists besides Oppenheimer at the nuclear test site. And so Milton's been doing the series of interviews, and that ran the Tuesday before the con, which he didn't warn me when it was running. And so I had a lot of commentary at the con to talk about in terms of that interview.
So, what were you doing at a Phil Seuling con in 1975?
Well, okay, this is I don't want to do the short version of this story. Basically, I'd been going to conventions since my aunt first took me to one when I was little in 1971, and by 73, I was setting up at Phil's monthly show, selling extra back issues, extra comics to kind of raise money for my own collection. And it was at one of those monthly conventions that Phil sort of launched the direct market Seagate, which had approached DC and to sell direct to comic book resellers. And Phil's partner, associate, and then ultimately in a relationship, Johnny, walked down the aisles with a clipboard signing people up for the service. They had already had one or two dealers from Phil's friends, but I just happened by good luck to be right in the front of the room that day. So she's probably stopped at my table third or fourth at the most. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I did the math quick. I had two friends who bought comics, and if we got 40% off, we got mint comics, and I got to keep a couple extras. So if I did the administration, so it worked out. And I was retailer number 6, which is pretty wild.
That is very wild. I mean, so this was 2 years after you started selling, at Seuling's shows.
Yeah.
But now, how long had you been going to cons or selling books before that?
So I probably just messed up the timeline. So 71, I went to my first convention. 73, by maybe even late 72, I was selling at Phil's monthly shows. Definitely not the big July 4th weekend shows. And then 73, late 73 was when they started signing people up for quote unquote direct market sales. I don't think he called them that. And then books were 74 books were definitely you could order. And in this photo that I was referencing, there's a picture of me at a 75 convention. I'm leaning on some of those comics that I'd ordered through Seagate, which is pretty funny.
Dang, that's awesome to be there at the beginning of it all.
Yeah.
So what was Phil like? His name comes up in several of the conversations that I have with collectors who are in that area of the country. But what was he like? I mean, since you got to at least interact with him a bit because you were behind setting up a booth and everything.
Phil was so to my age group, little kid, basically preteen going into teens. Phil was intimidating, and there's some photos you can find of him online where he kind of looks like, I call him King Conan. He just has his big ponytail and is pulled back, and there's a cut, like if you caught him in a candid photo, chances are he might have looked like he had 30 things on his mind for his convention or his business. And he, like I said, he could be intimidating to kids. But what I do know from my friends who are artists, professionals, and certainly my own interaction with him is, he supported the idea of comic art as art almost before anyone, and really understood. That's why the original New York Comic Convention, I believe, I'll probably get one or two words, but it's the Comic Art Convention, basically.
It was, yeah, the New York
Right.
Comic Art Convention.
Right. And he really understood the value of, I mean, he would go out of his way to reach out to artists who were just not sort of in the swing of things and didn't know that fandom even existed. And the 72, which was the first of his that I went to, is really a famous convention because it's where Dennis Kitchen and some of the other underground artists interacted with Eisner and Harvey Kurtzman. And that was kind of like these two generations. And the older the underground artists, I think, probably assumed the older guys were, kind of like square. And they were anything but. They might have looked, they might have dressed in suits and ties and, lost their hair a little bit. But they were not. And it was interesting. Again, another ground zero opportunity. Just like sort of like, this interaction. I've talked to Dennis about that since. And that was like super important. That was an important show for everyone. And, shortly thereafter, Jim Warren started publishing the Spirit reprints. It was the first time we really got to see Spirit stories if you were of a younger generation, and outside the one that was in Jules Pfeiffer's book, The Great Comic Book Heroes. And of course, in Steranko's History of the Comics, they had referenced a lot of this classic material. But it was this period when all this stuff started to see the light of day, some EC stories and these Eisner stories. And then getting back to the sort of main point, you had this weird crossover of the underground and traditional artists. And, I think those relationships ultimately led to Will coming back into the business and really doing, a lot of these independent graphic novels, some of which he, are some of his best work.
I agree. So that's cool. I mean, to have been there and gotten to be a part of that. How long did you exhibit as as a comic book dealer?
I didn't. So it got, one of the things that was difficult is you kind of lost your spot if you pulled out for reasons. And I had school and I, athletics and, occasionally lucky enough to have a girlfriend. So it was like, kind of like I would come in and out, but I also during the summers wanted to not work in a traditional job. So I kind of, during the summers, I would, whenever there was a table opening, I would grab a table. And then I would be at the flea markets on the weekends that I couldn't go to a show or something like that for. So I would say fairly active until 77, and then summers only from 77 to 81. Okay.
So was it during that time that you picked up your first piece of original art, or?
No, that would date back to the earlier period. And I was really trying to check off a lot of back issues. I collected mostly Marvel, but some of the DC Silver Age stuff was important to me too. And but if I couldn't find stuff I wanted, or for some reason had a couple extra bucks, which was unusual for me in those days, occasionally you'd see, pieces of art for $5 or $10. And I would say in those, I was not particularly what's the word I'm looking for? I certainly didn't see necessarily distinctive pieces. I just like, oh, look, original pieces of art. And they were typically the stuff that was starting to creep into those shows. There was a lot of 70s stuff that, maybe was finally being returned back to the artists. And being sold semi-legitimately, as opposed to the stuff that had been stolen and was being sold a little bit more under the table. And so, I remember buying, John Buscema, Sal Buscema, Gene Colan, Rich Buckler, a bunch of that very late 60s, early 70s stuff. I probably never paid more than $10 a page and mostly paid $5.
Wow. And buying direct from the artist?
No, mostly either people who were repping them or people who had, said that they'd gotten the art from the artist. So
right.
That was again, this sort of mid 70s period is right around the time that the artists were starting to get their art back. And right around the time that the artists who weren't getting their art back were complaining. There was this, there's a apocryphal story about a big theft of art that was being transported when DC moved back in that period. And, not unexpectedly, Neil Adams was one of the proponents of making sure that artists got their art back, because Neil felt a lot of his stuff had been ripped off.
Right. No, I've always credited Neil, as being a big reason we have the hobby today. Without
we have the hobby.
I mean, without him really forcing, the publisher's hand to give the artwork back to the artists. I mean, it would have happened eventually, but thankfully he started it early and definitely corrected some wrongs. It didn't fix the fact that a lot of art had already walked out the door one way or another, and but what are you going to do? But I completely agree. I think Neil, we owe Neil a debt of gratitude for getting that artwork out back to the artists who deserve to have it returned.
Yeah, it just made it more. It made the whole process more consistent. And I mean, really, and I think I'm pretty sure that the first company to actually make sure the art got returned, I think, was Atlas Seaboard. I think they actually, it was part of their play for the artist to get some people on board. And somebody's going to correct me, I know, at some point, and so, one of those guys is going to say, no, that's not the way, but I'm pretty sure they, at that point, and that's 74, 75, at that point, Marvel and DC were starting to, but my understanding is it was more of a squeaky wheel situation in those days. And I'm sure you followed it on social media and some of the Facebook groups. There's been some chatter about some, great art heists and stuff like that, which, I'm not privy to, so I don't know what. I do know that even though some art was starting to be returned, I do know that Marvel sat on a ton of it, and that's been well publicized for 15 years. So, sorry, not well publicized for 15 years, but the fact that they held on to it for 15 more years.
Exactly. I mean, I talked to Steranko at an art show in Pennsylvania a few years ago, and I remember him telling me, around that time, he was like, he went down to the lockers and he would not leave until he was able to walk away with every single thing that was in there that he could find that was his. And, he didn't tell me what year that was, but yeah, I mean, the artists were pretty frustrated. And even then,
Jim
wasn't there.
From our artist edition experience, I can tell you that, Jim was very savvy in terms of what he was able to get back.
Mm-hmm. So, well, it sounded like it. I mean, he wasn't going to put up with anything, he would have fought everyone to the last man. Exactly. I wish I was recording the conversation I had, because that was the first time I met him was at this art show, and Manny was with him. So Manny introduced us and told him who I was, and he went right to that and talked for about 15 minutes on his experience with getting his art back and how mad he was. And you could tell even to this day, he would fight. He was ready to go back and fight anybody.
And again, I mean, who could have, 30, 40, 50 years ago, you couldn't predict something like an artist edition, right? You couldn't say, okay, somebody's going to want, books of original art at a 1-to-1 size. But, thankfully, a lot of those artists got that art back, and were able to, we were able to scan it from them, and obviously the books where the artist got it back and then sold it. We had to let Scott play Sherlock Holmes and find that art, and he did a great job of it too.
No, that's true. No, Scott has done a great job on the artist editions. That's for sure. I mean, I think we're all thankful to have those out.
I think he's made. My theory is that Scott and I are responsible for partly give us 20% or less of the inflation in original art prices, because once you own those books and you see how cool it is, how can you not want to own original art?
It's true. It's absolutely true.
Honestly, that's really, I mean, you're not going to necessarily own the stuff that's in those books, because that's either in the hands of the artists or the collectors. But, you do see that stuff and you go, wow, I really, I want something similar and comparable to what I see in those books.
Agreed. So, hey, when you bought those original pieces, you mentioned John and Sal and Buckler. I mean, were you buying published interiors, that sort of thing?
Yeah. The $5 and $10 stuff was the published interiors, and again, they weren't splashes. Some of them, I never bought anything that didn't have at least a panel or two with a character in it. I wasn't interested in just sort of a bunch of chitter chatter, and Stan was good at chitter chatter, and so there was some, some Marvel pages from that period which are just it's like Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts just talking for 6 panels.
Right.
I was like, no, I don't need that. So yeah, it was all published as, I mean, maybe something that had been pulled, or maybe it was an inventory story had slipped in there. I don't remember. The punchline to the story is kind of sad. So it's, I don't necessarily remember all the art. So let me dive right into that punchline. So that was the 70s. Kind of really didn't look at it much in the 80s. And then in the late 80s, I became a partner in a comic book store in Yonkers and then Hartsdale, New York, called Dragon's Den. It's a pretty well-known suburban to New York City store that some of the partners included like Pete and Joe Koch, who are very well known in
in the art world.
Pete in the art world and Joe in the comics world, and and again, those guys are a little bit older than me, but kind of like Phil Seuling convention veterans, like me. Anyway, so I was partners in the store, and we had a fellow managing it who one day said, "Hey, didn't you tell me once you have some original comic art?" I said, "Yeah, I've got 20 or 30 pieces." He goes, "Well, there's a customer who's been bugging us if we have any art. Do you want to see if you can sell it?" I was like, "Well, okay, sure. If we, it's fine." So I brought the pieces in. It must have been around 30, and the customer came in a week later, and the manager came back to me and said, "Hey, that guy likes this stuff. He'll give you $900 for the whole thing. It's about $30 a page." I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. I never paid more than 10. I paid 5 for most of it." I'm like, "Sure, I'll do that." Oops.
Yeah. Well, it sounded good at the time.
It was about 1990, I think. So it sounded good at the time. Sounded good at the time.
Well, really good. I mean, but so doing that though, then when did you get back into buying art at that point? And during the course of all that too, I mean, were you ever meeting the artists at the shows? I mean, getting to hang out?
Yes. Oh, my again, going back to that 1972 Comic Art Convention. That was just, I mean, so many people I met at that show. People like Jack Kirby and Will Eisner and Alex Toth, and then the quote unquote younger generation, Walter Simonson, Howard Chaykin, people like that, some of whom I'm fortunate enough to call my friends today. So, which is great. But I was just a nutty little fanboy in those days. So
sure.
But
so after the big sale where you had $900 in your pocket, I mean, I assume you didn't turn that into a nice cover or something?
No, I did probably buy some, given the timing, I probably bought some back issues. That might have been the time I got my FF1, which turned out to be trimmed. All these punchlines are sad. I don't want to come off as a sad sack. By the way, Bootlegging is a Habit asked me if this is a bottle of vodka. No, it's just Carlsbad alkaline water. So, but that's not a bad idea. Vodka. I like that.
Mm-hmm. We've had a few people have a few drinks during the show. Albert Moy likes to have a drink or two when I've got him on the show for a heritage recap or something. It makes him a lot more entertaining.
Albert brought beer to a show one time and got a little, at least probably more than one, but I know he got in trouble. I was at the one where he got in trouble for that. It was fun, but we were having a good time.
Wheeling and dealing with Albert Moy and a beer. Wow. So
yeah. So you asked me you asked me when I got back into it. So I got back casual. So I went to work for Topps in 1992, working on the comic book and the trading card side, and I ended up with a couple of pieces from artists that we had hired for either card work or for comic book work. Not many. I just was kind of casually buying it. What I should have done is bought every Dracula page from Mike Mignola, but hindsight's 2020. Yeah, most of those pages were not the covers, of course, but most of those pages were $50 or less. Maybe that was our friends and family price. I don't really. Sometimes people ask me about pricing in frame of reference periods, and I can't always trust my memory on that, because if I didn't do it, I wouldn't remember. Sure. But I did buy. I was at New York, the revised New York Comic Con, which Fred Greenberg ran for a few years. And I did buy a couple of really nice Fantastic Four paintings by Fassler and Larson that were destined for a Sal Q portfolio that never happened. It was part of his Marvel series, and Marvel can't. You can still buy the Hulk and some other ones on eBay today. They're all over the place. But and Sal was also another New York sort of early 70s veteran. Anyway, these paintings were large, probably 20 by 30, and they were just they just struck me as beautiful. I always liked those guys, and we had actually, I think, had them do some work for us at Topps. So I bought those Fantastic Four paintings, and that kind of got me started into a little bit. And then I got distracted by other things, and just the Fantastic Fours hung up in my house for a really long time. But I didn't continue to buy art, and then came back to it again. By now it's too expensive. I came back to it again around 2005, 2006, and that I've been collecting since, in waves. Some years a lot, some years a little.
Did you hang on to the FF paintings?
I saw them recently. I want to say either last year or the year before.
Oh, wow.
So I did. There were, at one point, I thought those were the only two they had completed before the portfolio was canceled. Then I found out that there were 3, and then I found out there were 4. So they actually had done half the portfolio before it was done. In one of those wacky things that you can't believe happens. So mine had only been on the market once. I bought them when they were on the market, and then they were in my collection for 93 to last year. But for whatever reason, they sold the same auction as the 3, as a third one. Whoever owned that one sold that same auction. It was pretty funny that they both ended up in Heritage that same period. Wow.
I'm gonna have to go back and do some searching. I mean, I can't picture them, and I watch a lot of Heritage auctions. Obviously, I just can't picture what those were like. But I mean, I've always loved Fassler and Larson too.
Yeah, those guys. I thought those. Yeah, those guys are great, and that was their sweet spot. That late 80s to early 90s was really their sweet spot. So,
yeah. Wow.
I think I've seen. I think Mike has had some from the Spider-Man portfolio. I'm not sure I've seen Hulk portfolio pieces come up. I'd probably look hard at one of those if it did.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're definitely a part of my childhood as far as I've always loved their work. So that's they
did the cover for the Barbie Twins comic book for Topps. I had forgotten about that. I had forgotten about that comic until about 2 years ago, and then somebody brought it up to me and said, "Hey, is this you?" And I was like, "How do I answer that question?"
So what was your role at Topps?
So I had a couple of different titles. Let's think of associate publisher and then ultimately director of publishing, but it was really primarily a marketing and operations job. So basically promoting the things that we were doing and making sure that the stuff actually got out the door whenever possible. Mm-hmm. So for all the people that are upset that maybe something came out really late, I certainly apologize for my contribution in that. But we were, what's really interesting, we did a lot with very limited resources. You and I were talking in the green room about Star Wars Galaxy a little bit. It's 3 series of trading cards. Every card is an individual painting by a comic book / fantasy / science fiction artist. And we had project managers for those, but we were, you can't, it's just funny. You don't know what you can't do until you realize what you've done. And that, again, the 3 series encompassed more than 400 images, which is, by the time you're dealing with the artist, getting prelims approved by Lucasfilm, getting finals approved, it was chaos. And we just didn't, and that was just one project among a gazillion while we were launching the comic book line. Wow. So I was fortunate to be there. I was fortunate to be there from the beginning. I helped do the marketing on Dracula, and then got kind of deeply involved in our Jurassic Park adaptation and the Kirby stuff, which was great because I got to work with Jack and Roz. And Roz took an instant like to me because it turned out her maiden name was Goldstein. So she was like, "Oh, we must be related." I was like, "I wasn't going to dispute that."
Sure. That way. Well, that's awesome. See, that's so. How long were you at Tops?
4 years.
4 years. Okay.
Yeah,
You got a lot done in 4 years.
we did. I mean, again, it was, you don't know that kind of it. Nobody said we couldn't do it, so we just kept doing it. And I really, that falls squarely on the lap of my boss, Ira Friedman, who literally just retired officially a week ago from Tops, although he's not retired from business. But he had been at Tops over 33 years or so. And, they weren't going to give Ira's group a lot of resources. And it was kind of ridiculous in hindsight, again, what we launched the comic book division with. I mean, we hired a couple of editorial people, Jim Salcrup, Dwight Zimmerman, some other folks, and had some budgets for putting out, paying freelancers and putting out books. But, I mean, it was a real, seat of our pants kind of operation. And, again, these things get, through the lens of nostalgia, these things get great. At the time, in the middle of all that stress, we all wanted to die. And there were all these trade shows with all these distributors in those days. You had to go to the Diamond Show and the Heroes World Show and the Capital City Show. And then you had to work in all the consumer conventions.
Right.
Wild. It was really wild.
Wow. Well, I mean, and just out of curiosity, what had you done before that to qualify for the Tops job? So
my background was publishing. While I was a sort of partner at Dragon's Den was a side hustle. I had been in IBM. I managed a group of their publications. Got a little bored with that, and then had an opportunity to start a baseball magazine where some of the guys that were partners in the store actually helped finance the magazine, which was kind of in addition to some other investors. Mm-hmm. So I'd run a baseball magazine. I was fairly well versed in comic books and trading cards, and it was just kind of one of those natural fits where, oh wow, where are we going to get a guy who's kind of like into all the nerd stuff that we're trying to put out the door? So,
right. Well,
the magazine. I don't know if you. And this may be a little off topic here, but Topps had a great baseball magazine called Topps Magazine, which is a really beautiful, slick, just one of the best magazines out there. And it was very popular for a while. And I guess it's okay to tell the story at this point. But basically, MLB didn't like the position that Topps took as sort of putting out a magazine meant you didn't really have to pay royalties on it, because we were obviously paying them royalties on trading cards. And right. So they were hassling us over royalties, and there were some other issues, and we ended up folding it. Now, a few years before that, I had folded my own baseball magazine. So if anybody's ever thinking of doing a baseball magazine, don't hire me. Absolutely not. Because it's a weird resume thing. It's like close two different magazines, baseball magazine. So.
Well, I got my start in the publishing area too, doing trade magazines. So I know that
that's cool.
Very well. Yeah.
The idea,
not as glamorous as baseball, but
well, I mean, it's like that's one of the reasons I needed to move on, is because the IBM stuff, they were a great company, and I did learn some really interesting things there, but a lot of that technical material is just dry after a while, and you're trying to liven it up as best as you can. I did customer magazines and shareholder magazines, and did do some fun stuff along the way. Managed to sneak some sports related stuff in there. We had we had Willie Stargell as a speaker at one of our events, so I did a Willie Stargell trading card. It was fun. it was cool. Fun. So
what happened after Topps?
So after Topps, I worked for Inkworks, a competitive trading card company, for a while. And that was great. We got to do a lot of great things. My favorite thing in that was we had the license for James Bond for 5 years, and we did this full-on James Bond encyclopedia of all the movies and all the characters in a 3-card series. And the fun part of that was I got to go over to London and rifle through the Bond archives. And they were a disorganized mess. And the archivist there, she was always being pulled in 100 different directions, and they had relented because they'd taken our money for the license. So they had relented. Okay, finally, Greg can come over and start working on this. And when she saw that I actually knew what I was doing, she kind of jumped in, and we kind of organized those archives together. Still to this day, it's one of my favorite projects. It was just great. Tens of thousands of slides, some physical photos, some large transparencies. I mean, that was a lot. You know, we got them all in the film order. We got them all scanned, or we got the ones that she wanted to use. I would say that. And her name is Meg. I can't remember her last name, but she basically said, okay, from now on, whenever a licensee needs, we're going to give them a reference file of a couple of thousand as opposed to 100,000 or 20, however many we looked at for a week. It was great.
So you did a good service to her by going through all that.
Yeah, I mean, right. It's kind of licensees often should be getting paid for what they do as opposed to paying the licensor. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother podcast. It's got not much to do. Rick Welch says Pussy Galore rookie card. There might have been a Goldfinger set, Rick, back in the 60s, but I did talk to her. She was Honor Blackman. She was terrific. Lovely lady. Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful lady.
Man, and Rick Welch is he's always got a good zinger for us. So that was the idea that you got to meet her as well is pretty crazy. But so how did you get to IDW? I mean, that
so obviously I was in cards, I was out of comics, and I was determined to get into video gaming because I saw how popular and it was like, it felt like, okay, the pop culture and technology, I understood technology. I'd worked for IBM. I certainly was interested in pop culture. I wasn't a hardcore gamer by any stretch of the imagination. I was more of an arcade gamer. I still am more of an arcade. I still like those games better than the more involved games. But I saw kind of that's where all the action was, and I had heard that Activision was doing its sort of first licensed work. They had been primarily doing their own intellectual property. They were starting to they added Star Trek, they got some Disney things, and then they signed a Marvel deal for one game. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I called a friend of mine who was working with Activision. I said, they seem like they're going down this road. Is there any chance they need like a brand development or a business development or a licensing person? And he goes, I can't believe you called me. They actually do. And they asked me if I knew anyone. I said, well, you do. So I ended up segueing into video games, where we did some of the really great Marvel games. We did a lot of other great stuff, the Tony Hawk games and some other things. But I was just, it was just, again, it was this weird confluence of me being in the right place and kind of where I wanted to be in my career at that moment. And so we had a sort of head of product development for the Marvel games, Todd Jefferson, TQ Jefferson. And he was a real comics fan, really understood the lore, really understood how comics could be made into video games. Really smart, terrific guy. I see him every once in a while at a convention, probably not since before the pandemic, but it was just the right timing. And Marvel was just coming out of bankruptcy, and those video game royalties were everything to Marvel. I mean, they got their advances from Fox on X-Men and the Spider-Man thing which was not money that you would sneer at, but by 2001, those video game royalties were blowing through everything else they were doing. That was tremendous. The guys on the video game teams were all comics fans. They asked me, and it was like a simple phone call, but they commissioned some new art from John Romita Sr. for one of those Spider-Man games. I want to say that was the PlayStation 1 Spider-Man game, not the movie game, they're just the sort of regular Spider-Man game. So, we did some other comic book Easter eggs, and we hired, I think we hired a few I don't remember how this went down because by the time the movie came out, I think I had just left, but we hired some comic book artists to do some drawings for a sequel game, but Sony ended up using some of those and then getting more for some DVD Easter eggs or some weird stuff. We had a great relationship with Sony. I was, the Activision offices were right down the road. I was there all the time. I was on the set. It was terrific. So it was another great experience. And I had to go back to New York for personal reasons and ended up working in Acclaim for a while. And of course, they had owned a comic book company, which they had pretty much closed by the time I got there. But Greg Fishback, who was the co-CEO, called me into his office and he said, he goes, if you see opportunities, let's make sure we capitalize on them. But those were few and far between, particularly since we didn't have any budget.
Right. So far you've done all my dream jobs. You guys have worked.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like it's a permanent
trading cards. I mean, I'm a big gamer. I used to be a big gamer, and then in the mid '90s to early 2000s, I was immersed in
that's great.
Yeah. So see, Activision, I mean, they made a lot of the games I played.
Well, they made, when I talk to people and, in my general demo, everybody remembers the Activision games for the Atari 2600 because those guys were Atari guys that went off and said, wait a minute, we're not making enough money. Let's do our own games. And that was the first lawsuit that basically, can third parties develop games for platforms?
Right.
And obviously I always work this cliche in. The rest, as they say, is history. I try and work that cliche into whatever covers. So,
but now that's how does this lead you to IDW then? It's still you're back in New York now.
So I'm back in New York, but I really miss California. And so I knew, again, sort of all these different relationships. I knew Ted Adams, who was publisher of IDW at the time. I knew Ted from the time he was at Dark Horse and Eclipse and in McFarlane, where we did, when I was at Inkworks, we worked on a project together, this trading card series that were photographs of all the Spawn toys. McFarlane had been hiring like top level photographers to take basically, I would call them design photos for lack of a better word, product shots. And these are beautiful. And I saw them just in a random meeting about something else. And I was like, oh, we should make a trading card set out of these. And sometimes those random ideas become products. So Ted was working for McFarlane at the time. I was working in Inkworks. We did this project together. A year or two later, he launched IDW. And so I knew it was around. And then an opportunity, and again, this is all weirdly interconnected. So then an opportunity came at Upper Deck to run their entertainment and gaming division. And again, excuse me, they liked the idea that, okay, I was a trading card guy, I was a gaming guy, I could figure all this, theoretically, I could figure all this stuff out.
You navigated it really well at the end of, that's the thing.
Yeah, and then it turned out that one of IDW's first hustles, and it ultimately became a little bit of a side hustle, was doing work as a vendor for Upper Deck. They helped them with art acquisition, they helped them run tournaments, they did a bunch of interesting things with Upper Deck. So the only reference I put on them was Ted. I was like, yeah, if you guys want to know anything about me, just he knows me. So that that ended up that getting me back out to San Diego, and Upper Deck was a wild ride. That's probably the safest thing to say. And I'll let anyone Google that era, just Upper Deck and Yu-Gi-Oh, and that will yeah, that will
I'm making a note to do that later.
Yeah, no, you'll have, it's good time. If you do a deep dive, you'll find all the legal paperwork, of which I am not involved in at all, thankfully. But again, sort of timing is everything. When things started going a little haywire there, IDW had just reached the point of inflection where it was kind of time to reach the next step. and Ted asked if I would come down and help him as sort of as sort of the number 2 guy, and so I got hired a couple of weeks after Scott Dunbier, so which was 2008, 7, somewhere around there. So ultimately president and then publisher of, as Ted moved on, of IDW. So again, you were saying earlier, all things you like, comics, trading cards, video games. That's the way I felt. I get to be in my career, I got to be a 12-year-old kid, for better or worse, forever.
That's amazing. So, because I never went to IDW's offices, but I mean, you guys had some kind of an art gallery there at some point, right?
We did. So in 2015 or so, and I might be off a year or two.
Around there, yeah.
Yeah, around there, we moved to a beautiful location called Liberty Station, which is a private/public consortium that took over the old Navy barracks there. And Ted and his partner Robbie Robbins really had the sort of the vision to take some of the space that we were going to use for our offices and potentially do this comic art gallery. And it was beautiful. I mean, it really was. It was really nice. With all our relationships, we had some, either art we owned or art that we just asked artists to lend us for display. And we had some really nice exhibits. And, it was expensive. It was a quarter of IDW's overhead was devoted to that art gallery and some miscellaneous storage.
Was the gallery your idea or just?
No, I want to say Ted and Robbie, because I'm not sure which one. It was definitely from them, and they definitely deserve the credit for that.
Well, that's cool. I mean,
it's nice. It's, Liberty Station is not necessarily San Diego's biggest tourist spot, but people do come through, and a lot of them came through the gallery. We did a lot of events there. We had Kevin Eastman a bunch of times. We had Walter Simonson. We had Howard Chaykin for the Star Wars Artist Edition. We did a lot of. We had Shannon Wheeler for one of his books. We did a lot of that was the best part of that space, was kind of having these opportunities where employees and creators could interface with the public. It was great. Really, I really enjoyed that.
Well, I mean, I think galleries kind of go hand in hand, right? I mean, remember George Lucas had, he was part owner in Super Snipe. Super Snipe ended up having their own gallery in New York as well. And
that almost brings us full circle back to that whole Phil Seuling conversation.
It does.
Phil was partners in some aspects of business with Ed Summer, who was Super Snipe.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So there was a relationship there. And again, because unfortunately Phil died fairly young, certainly by today's standards, of cancer. There's a lot of that kind of history and now Ed has passed away too, that's just kind of gone. But the gallery and Phil and Ed and George Lucas, they were all interconnected in this weird Venn diagram. So, yeah,
man. Yeah, I missed the boat. That would have been a cool time.
You and me, but all I have to do. A lot of people want a time machine. All I have to do is just make slightly different decisions. I was in the right place and I was in the right time.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, early 70s, New York would have been, and as a comic fan would have been an incredible place to have gotten to hang out and get to know some people. Because who knows where your career could have gone, right? I mean, as long as you met the right people.
It's true. And, I guess it was a subconscious thing. So Star Wars came out my senior year of high school. Joe Jusko and I talk about this all the time, because he and I are the same age. We had except for the fact that he's an extremely talented artist and I am anything but. Joe and I have a similar background in New York, with the conventions, with the same age. But I think in the back of my mind, after I saw Star Wars, I realized that, you could be in popular culture and popular arts without necessarily being in comics or other things specifically. But but obviously if you go through that resume that we just talked about, I've clearly always come back to it. And I always enjoy the comic art aspect of comics and visual storytelling.
Well, that's, I mean, that's that's why we all love it, right? I mean, for me, I mean, I love reading the stories, but if it wasn't for the art, I mean, it just wouldn't be the same, you know. And that's why it's amazing we don't have more art collectors in the hobby. It's probably better because we can, you know, as crazy as the prices are now, if all of a sudden we had 50 times the number of art collectors out there, you know, we would all be priced out of everything we enjoyed today. But it's always surprising to me, you know, that we have, you know, as far as the macro view of comics and pop culture, and we as collectors, there's an infinite number more, you know, comic book collectors out there than there are comic art collectors, and it's just surprising, especially as prevalent as artists have become in the last 20 years. You know, I don't understand how it hasn't happened. You know, comic art fans has been out there for 20 years. You would think that, you know, with the exposure that our segment of the hobby has had, that there would have been an explosion of people collecting original art.
I think I think you're right. I think the problem is that weird demarcation line between commercial art and fine art, and obviously comic book art, you know, we think of it as fine art because, you know, it is, but it's essentially commercial art. Somebody was hired to create something that's going to be sold as a product, and so the galleries don't typically go near commercial art, and you know, even the few, you know, that were open and dealing with, you know, magazine and other professional illustrations, just it just doesn't have the same allure. I think if you could go into, you know, 3 or 4 galleries in New York, 3 or 4 in LA, a couple in Chicago, and at least some of the major markets, and see comic art, and so there would be more of an exposure for people. You know, so many people who are not comic book people have come into my house at one time or another and looked at some of the art, and they don't, you know, they've never seen it. They've just
Right.
they just haven't. You know, it might, you know, it might be a slow burn. It might be these, you know, the artisan edition reprints of the artist editions, where at least people can see what an original piece of art looks like, even if it's not the exact same size, you know, but it's a $40 soft cover, and, you know, maybe cheaper online. You know, maybe that will, you know, again, a slow burn, kind of like my theory earlier about, oh yeah, the artist editions will, have sort of forced us all to pay a little bit more, because it just reminds everybody how cool this stuff is.
That's true. Well, why don't we start looking at some of the pieces in your collection?
Sounds good. I do want to say a shout out to Jeffrey C, who likes my background and he wants to use it as a Zoom background. And I appreciate that. Okay, so this is, I live in a beautiful house, but there, like, the room that I call my office, where I have art hanging, is just a terrible room for a video. And so I finally I started, I did a video cast a couple of months ago, and I'm like, okay, I've got to find a good spot. And I was like, well, it's very tropical here. Let's try this. So,
yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. Usually when somebody's in front of you, have to have a good light in front of you, because typically, you know, you'd almost look like you're in the witness protection.
Yeah, no,
with the window behind you.
I did witness protection my first or second Zoom meeting during the pandemic, and I was like, oh no, this is never going to work. So there's a lot of light on here. I might have to start. I might have to break down and get contacts, because it's been pointed out to me that if you use a ring light and you look up, the ring light will reflect in your glasses. So
yeah, well, see if I turn. There
I got it.
Yeah, they are there. So that's why I tend to kind of keep my glasses lower from that, or you know, if you put them on, I've got them over here, but my desk isn't big enough to kind of spread it too far out. But you know, you just don't want it in front of you. If it's in front of you, it's a mess.
Yeah.
So I used to only have one. I bought 2.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, I was an amateur about all of this, because I think this is video 168 of just this series. So you've been doing a lot of these.
I have. I went on to YouTube the other day, and it said we had 900 videos on the channel, and I was like, where did you know, this is in 3 years, and it's not all live streams. We posted some pre-recorded stuff, but at least 700 of those have to be live streams. So yeah, I've put myself through the ringer trying to, you know, figure out the right ways to do things. I finally invested in a better camera, but it's still always learning. But I've just never. I was going to comment when we started the chat, though, about the fact that I can actually see you, because typically you would be in silhouette.
if you saw how much light I have on in the house right now, it's pretty funny. So and you know, we should do this. We should do a turn. Let me volunteer to do a turn the tables and interview you at one point. So
I always enjoy, BSing about myself. I don't mind.
okay.
But yeah, no, that would be great. And and I remember, and I never followed up with you. I remember early in the pandemic, you had emailed me saying, there's some things, I got some ideas that you could do on the YouTube channel, and I never followed up with you.
Yeah, but you've been, I mean, you kind of, you
I think I was too busy, but I remember
that. And you went down some of those roads anyway. And I mean, I think, honestly, I think Dueling Dealers was brilliant. I really do. Sometimes it takes too long to get to the pieces that I'm interested in.
I know. And sometimes we get through the pieces that people can afford too soon, but yeah, no, that was like lightning in a bottle. And I know both those guys will always take credit for it, but I mean, it just like hit me one day. I just had this, I had this vision of my.
Wait, are you saying that there are art dealers who have egos in our industry? What are you trying, Bill? What are you trying to say?
Just a little bit, but it doesn't matter. I mean, but it just plays into why I knew that they would be great together.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's something. It really is. So congratulations on that.
Oh, well, thank you. It's fun. I mean, certainly the market's changed a lot since then. Now that we don't have when we didn't have cons, it was so much easier. We had sales shows that were just crazy, and everything's kind of back down to earth. But the thing is, us just all getting together and hanging out is still so much fun that I could do it for as long as I wanted, and I'd still, even if we had very little sales, and it'd still be fun because just getting to hang out with them, interacting with the people in the chat. I mean, it changed everything for doing the live streams. Just
yes,
it wasn't just the interview show anymore. It was something fun that we could be creative with.
I can see that, and again, your editing and your technical skills, you're kind of like, you're adding to the just sort of the jovial nature of the whole program. I get a kick out of it.
Cool. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. It's
sure.
I have an art background, so that was me getting to be creative again.
That's great.
And video editing, and writing. So I get, because we've written a lot of it, but I've gotten to involve my family in it. So it's been, where they've written some of the skits and the bits, and they do some of the filming, and it's just as a project, I couldn't have asked for something better than that. So all right. Well, Nick Ferrucci says you've got a beautiful CAF gallery, so now we get to look at some of the pieces that you have posted.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate that. As I've warned Bill, the actual pieces in my collection that there's not a match. There was supposed to be a match of what I was going to put on my blog, what I was going to put on Facebook, and what I was going to put in CAF, and it's a little inconsistent. So, but thank you. There's some good ones that need to go up in CAF one of these days.
Well, I think most of these are up except for one, right? I think the last
of the ones I picked for, yes, it ended up being that way, which is great.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll jump into this first piece because, I mean, man, you can't ask for a nicer Windsor Smith Conan piece, I think, than this. I mean, there's a lot of great ones out there, but you don't see too many where that are just, they have great action in them. And I mean, I did that first panel, a half page splash is just gorgeous.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I'd wanted a Barry Smith with his Conan. That was just one of those game changers for me that helped get me out of sort of only liking conventional superheroes and into something else. And I always admired the way he did multiple panels with incredible detail. So I always figured I'd have one of those, 8, 10, 12 panel pages. But I saw this and was able to work a deal out for it. It's it's basically it's the cover of Conan fighting the serpent and a half splash. It's just, and then you do have that tremendous detail in the bottom panels. It's just I love Barry Smith's run on this title so much.
Yeah, I agree, and you're absolutely right. I mean, traditionally, if you were to go on to CAF and search for Barry's Conan work, you're going to see many multiple panel pages. Where, like you just said, there could be 12. He'd have 3 rows of 4, vertical panels in there. That was his style back then, and funny, right? For a sword and sorcery-ish kind of book, that to present things in that way, but they just worked. I mean,
Yeah, he really captured, one of the things about it, just he really captured the storytelling, and obviously that's part Roy, and the source material is clearly responsible for this, but it wasn't all this kind of action. It was, there was definitely just a lot of narrative and interesting things happening with, it really was sword and sorcery, and this page has both. So
yeah, I mean, it's gorgeous, and again, it stands out from the crowd, and I'd encourage everybody to go check out CAF, to see that you just don't see too many panel pages, maybe a splash page here or there for like a title page, but even then it wouldn't have the action on it. So that one's just
some of those title pages where Conan is just overlooking the city,
right?
Or something, just exactly. Like, and you look at the detail in there, it's just crazy.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, that's because I can be honest, I go into lots of people's CAF galleries, but I don't spend enough time. So that was just cool to see that piece. So how long have you had that?
8 years.
Wow, that's great. Well, at least you didn't buy it in the last couple of years, because that would have been
but it's interesting. I was just, who was I talking to? I might have been Albert at Comic-Con. Barry Smith is one of those guys where the inflation rate the last couple of years is not keeping up with the market overall. And just sort of like, if you look at, I'm always fascinated by that, particularly. Sorry, it's another quick parenthetical.
No, I mean, I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to hear that. I had no idea.
But I'm also, it's really interesting. On the Original Art Facebook group, every once in a while people will post old catalogs, from Mitch or from someone else, like from the 70s, or even like scans of CBG ads are starting to pop up. And of course, it's the time machine thing, right? Can I, if only I could go back and buy a Neil Adams page for $25. But what fascinates me is, if you grade on the curve, not every, some things went up 1,000%, 10,000%. Some things only went up a couple 100%. And you go, if you make a mistake in your time machine, you kind of wasted a bunch of energy, particularly comic strip art, which I think I collect some comic strip art. But it was interesting to go back and look at some 70s prices on, Dick Tracy or, Terry and the Pirates, and think of the multiples. They're not crazy multiples. Maybe an Alex Raymond Flash Gordon would be, and something really great. But the rest of them are not where we are today. You certainly would much rather be buying Neil Adams and Barry Smith than strips, if you were doing it for investment as opposed to what you like. So.
Right. That's true. I mean, early on, strips were what people were more interested in before they were buying comic art.
Yes. And it was pages, and some strip artists were smart enough to demand their art back way before it became commonplace in comic book, in the comic book world. So
that's probably why then that was what people were into prior to picking up your episode. I never even really thought about that. But I've always read that strip art sold for more money in the early 70s into the mid 70s than comic book art did.
Yeah, I saw one crazy ad from CBG in the 70s. I can't tell you what year exactly because I wasn't that dialed into it, but it had Dick Tracy strips for $75 to $100 dailies. I'm like, okay, so now those are worth, call it $500 if they were old enough and they had the character. And it's like, okay, but again, there were, here's a John Buscema Avengers page for $25. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the people reading, Chester Gould, Dick Tracy, they've aged out of at least the collector base. So that's why the prices had to stop somewhere. But I'm with you there, though. It's interesting. But I like the idea that that it was because the strip artists had their work in hand and were able to establish some form of market before the comic book artists could, because they had the art. That just makes so much more sense. I always wondered why that was. I just kept thinking, well, maybe the collectors were only interested in the strips because that was what they grew up on, and that was why they were picking it up. But it was probably the supply and demand.
It's right. I think it's a combination, because I think, again, strips had circulation of 40, 50 million. Strip readers, comic books would never approach that, even in 1942. There's just no. total amount of people who would have read Dick Tracy or Flash Gordon or Little Nemo or how until really the early 60s when newspapers started hitting on hard times, and that big newspaper strike in New York folded half the newspapers, and a lot of those comic strips no longer had homes. It made it kind of odd which comic strips I saw as a kid and which ones I didn't. So
sure. Steve Lipsky mentioned these. Let's see. Jerry Robinson was savvy enough to ask for some of his favorite pages and covers returned back in the 40s. It's the only reason we see a lot of his work today.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Steve. And I think I knew that. I met Jerry at one of those Phil Seuling shows. It just keeps going back to how old I am at this point. But yeah, and I think a handful of other people were, if not savvy enough to get them back, were at least fortunate enough that they needed them for something or wanted them for something, and they had them.
Very true. Delight Loves Movies mentions that the films have probably had a lot to do with art prices. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I think it's there's just so many factors.
I see Marcus commenting on these movies, and I've worked on the trading cards for all of those. And I'm like, thanks for reminding me about that, Mark. Actually, The Shadow was kind of fun, at least in concept, because again, sort of the Topps connection with comics. We ran those Steranko paperback covers. They were chase cards in our trading card set, and we also got some new piece of art from Mike Kaluta. We took him to the premiere. Remember that?
Oh, that's cool. And Benno's in the audience, and he says there were great strip artists well before there were any great comic book artists. So that's probably true.
True, yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, the great strip artists definitely predate Kniff, Raymond, McKay. They all predate comic books, because essentially the earliest comic books were just repackaging of the strips. So yeah, good point.
Quite true. All right, well, let's look at the next piece.
Some more art.
We've got right, exactly. Al Williamson, Star Wars: Return of the Jedi page. I mean, how cool is this?
Yeah, I cannot tell you how fond I mean all these pages, but I cannot tell you how fond I am of this page. And Star Wars was again Star Wars came out when I graduated high school. Return of the Jedi came out when I graduated graduate school. I just adore this page. Anyone who goes on CAF will see the inscription because it's in the scan. So this was actually a page that Al gave to Mike Royer. And at one point about 18 years ago, Mike sold a lot of his collection. And I got like it. It's, I'm such a huge Williamson fan. I'm a fan of again, I'm glad you didn't ask me to name my top 10 favorite artists, because I'm not sure I can, but I definitely can't do 5. I might be able to do 10, but Al's definitely one of them. And this is a great Jedi page, in terms of sort of the characters in action. And you've got Slave Leia, and it's just terrific stuff. So
yeah, it definitely is. Steve wanted to know if you're going to Baltimore. I assume yes.
Yes. We're gonna, by the end of the show, we're gonna convince our friend here to join us too. But
I did enjoy myself there last year. Definitely.
Yeah, that was
my first time.
You need to come back. We're bringing the we'll talk about at the end of the show, but we're bringing the Jack Kirby slideshow back, which hasn't been seen at any convention in 5 years. So I'll tell you about that at the end.
Okay. All right. Sounds good to me. Let's see. Now the next piece is the one you asked me to get the published image for. So
this is my favorite Neil Adams DC piece that I own. I think the Marvel one is in this. It's the only Neil Adams Marvel one will come up later. So I asked you to put the published one in here because I own the original to the unpublished one, and I had a really fun conversation, and they weren't always fun with Neil about this. So I actually like the art in the unpublished one much better. It just even without the Fortress of Solitude, where they're inside as opposed to outside in the sky, I like the composition. I like pretty much everything about this more than I like the actual published one. And that's typically, like, for instance, if you look at Albert's dealer list, he's got an unpublished Green Lantern cover, and you can compare it to the published, and the opposite is true there. The published Green Lantern cover is better. It's very similar, but it's better composition, better layout, more dynamic, closer on Jordan. So I talked to Neil about this, and it was, of course, first of all, the best part of that conversation was that Neil said that no editor ever told him to redraw a cover. It was only when he realized he needed to redraw it. I thought that was hilarious. I would love to believe it's true. But in any event, the reason the change was made, whether Neil decided to make it or whether more likely the editor of the book decided to make it, is you don't realize they have superpowers in the original one, because they're two women having a fight. I'm not going to use the cliche, but they're having a fight, and Superman's breaking it up. But in the published one, they're both like, okay, something's up. Lois has power. She's flying. And, Neil said they could have potentially done something with the word balloons or the captions, but it just didn't. The idea that they were flying meant that Lois had gotten powers.
Right.
And it was obvious. But man, I think Superman's anatomy and the way he's holding his hands, it's so wonky. It's just, so when I saw the unpublished one, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just terrific. Particularly, again, it's got he's in the fortress, which is wild.
Yeah,
so,
no, I definitely like the unpublished one better as well. But that's funny. I could see Neil saying that. He only edited himself.
Yeah, but it was great. It was terrific, because it was just like, sure, okay. I mean, it was just, and what's funny was I didn't bring him. I must have been traveling when I don't remember if I talked to him about this art at a show or I was in visited the continuity offices a couple of times, but I had a copy with me, so I didn't get him to sign it, unfortunately.
I was just going to ask you. I mean, it's not signed. I mean, typically, didn't did Neil have? I mean, this must not have been sold by Neil originally, right? Because he would have signed it when he sold it.
It was unclear. He made no claim to it. It had come up twice for sale previously, so
okay.
He didn't say.
Yeah, I was just curious because I know he was always very particular about that, but that's good.
Yeah. So yeah, but it was fun. It's a fun story. It's just great.
Well, I got to interview Neil a couple times, and yeah, he was just a lot of fun.
We did. The kind of, I don't know. I haven't asked Chris if this is true, but I'm guessing that the last professional job that Neil did was a project we did at IDW with Craig Yo, comic book stories from the Holocaust, or about comic book stories about the Holocaust, essentially. Mm-hmm. And that's an unusual book because we had to get rights from multiple publishers, but Neil was a force of one. It was a lot easier to not argue with Neil. So a lesson I learned.
Yeah. Did you ever try?
Maybe once or twice, but not effectively.
Well, I enjoyed the little time I had with him. He was definitely very insightful, and and if he liked you, he was very open. I mean, he wanted to give me financial advice after the show, and
oh, absolutely.
I mean, I thought, well, that's so nice. I mean, this wasn't what I was expecting, out of him.
If you remember those artist edition portfolios that we did very early in the artist edition series at IDW, we did Thrill Kill, a Neil story from one of the Warren magazines. Yeah. So it's my second favorite Neil. I probably have 10 Neil memories that'll come to me later, but my second favorite that's coming top of mind is we're talking to him about this. Scott and I are on a conference call with Chris and Neil, and we hear all this like weird noise in the background, and Chris is doing most of the talking, and she's like, I'm sorry, he's doing some plumbing under the sink right now, and he'll it's like, oh, of course, please don't hurt your hands while you're under there.
Right, exactly. Wow.
Yeah, I for better or worse, right? I miss him.
No, it's like I'm not looking at the comments right now, but number one Marvel fan. I mean, he was ever at every show you'd go to. You could always find Neil's booth, right? I mean,
Right.
it's not the same going to shows anymore.
No, it's not. I mean, it was by the end, those last year or two before the pandemic, it was just this, pretty soon he was going to have a booth that was more impressive than DC or some of the other publishers. I mean, he was just like the banners kept getting bigger, they kept getting higher. It was great.
Yes, that is all true. So okay, next artist we're going to look at here, I know, is Michael Cho, and I love Michael's work. This is gorgeous.
Love this. This is a Detective 1000 cover, and it features all these weirdo Batmans of the 50s, and reminded me so much of the DC 25-cent 80-page giants from the 60s. So even though Batman had gotten the new look, I believe that was called, that Carmine had instituted in like 1964, all the giants were still reprinting the older stories. And this at Comic-Con, I think 18 or 19. Let's say maybe it was night. Well, I can't swear which one it was, but anyway, Albert he represents Michael. He had put it literally on display, and there was another collector and I both looking at it, and I was literally a second ahead. I mean, it could not have been closer. And so it just evokes such nice memories. I love Michael's stuff. I've become friendly with him. I own a bunch of his covers, but this is clearly my favorite. DC, I should have sent you the published cover for this too. DC reoriented the art a little bit, so unfortunately, some of the Batman in the back are actually covered. They made the logo bigger than the space that was allotted for it. So the original, you get to see all the Batman. And Michael has did most of the prelim work digital. He gave me copies of everything. So on my blog, it's like I literally have like all the various stages of this cover, which is great.
Well, I'm on your CAF, so I can.
Oh, there you are.
Look at it. Yeah, they did. That logo is a bit large.
Yeah, that covered a pox on whatever editor chose to cover Rainbow Batman up. That's not cool at all.
Right. Well, yeah, that's funny that you're I think many people have stories of going to any dealer's booth, right, and knowing that you're standing there next to competition. I mean,
I didn't know. Well, Albert has such a big booth at Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know because my competition was around the corner. I didn't know somebody else was looking at the exact same piece that I was at that moment. And so that was wild. Yeah, it's great. It's oversized piece too. It's larger than Twice Up Art. So it's great. Rich Danny says should have been, has a Dick Sprang feel, which I absolutely agree with. Again, Michael's got this. I can see a lot of different artists in Michael's work, but certainly it's evocative. It feels right on point with that stuff that Sprang was doing in the 50s. And then number one Marvel fan says should have been a Virgin cover, and I think DC has used it for something else, and it's definitely Michael sold it as a print, so it's definitely available in sort of a Virgin format. So yes, I agree with you, Nick, 100%. That's probably that's probably the most succinct description of why I like Michael's art. I have my favorite Superman pieces by Michael.
Yeah, he has a very graphic kind of approach to his style, and especially when he works in color and whatnot. I mean, I've always been impressed by him. I mean, and there's a few other artists, and you've got a piece or two, I think, from a few artists that have a similar approach with the way they use color when they're doing pieces. But we'll save that for.
I don't have my CAF open. Is my Superman cover by him in my CAF?
Let me see.
You're on top of all technology here.
I am. I'm going to double check here. I don't remember. Let's see. Show. Where are we here? No, you only have the detective, and then you have a JLA, the
Oh,
Silver
okay.
Age cover.
All right. Maybe I'll sneak that over to you before we're done. If I can multitask here. So,
But similar, again, you look at the way he handles this. I mean, that's some top level design, going into a piece like that, because I mean the way he's layered the characters, but it could be haphazard, but it just all works really well. And if he put in, if he had color to that, I mean, it'd blow my mind. But he could do it, and not many artists could. And he could almost just use one color.
Yeah, and that's the piece, and that's the Superman piece I have. So I'm gonna have to pull that up and send that over to you. The jail, Michael revered Darwin and was, and it shows. I mean, if I told you real quick this was a Darwin New Frontier piece, you'd go, yeah, of course it is.
Right.
It's got that feel to it. So
definitely. All right, now this is one I know everybody's going to appreciate. It's going to be, let me switch slides here, and Jack Kirby piece. This is everything you'd want in a Kirby piece, right?
Yeah.
I love this. I mean,
I do too. I actually, I really liked OMAC, maybe not as much as Commandi, which I was skeptical about, and I can talk about in a second when it first came out. But I really, I love the art in the Fourth World stuff, but I never really warmed up to it editorially. I bought it, I read it a lot, but it was really more about it was really more about the art on that. What I loved about OMAC was that Jack all of a sudden, like one day, he's like, I'm going to start seeing what the futurists are saying and what I think, and all of a sudden OMAC is all this crazy stuff. And it was different because, and I'm not sure if you go back and look at those 8 OMAC issues, I'm not sure the word grounded would immediately come to mind. But compared to all the sort of, Fourth World godly stuff, I was so intrigued by this book. And then this page came up, and it's got everything I want. It's got that, it's got the word OMAC on it, so the title character. It's a title page. It's got the crazy techno font, with the word kill. He's in his personal little smart rocket, and it's got Kirby Crackle. I mean, I adore this page. And it's really as close as Bruce Berry is going to ever be to Mike Royer in terms of sort of ink. So you have to look at it and go, are you sure? That's weird. Are we sure that's not Royer? But it's Bruce. So
wow. Yeah, I
mean, Timothy Finney says an OMAC toy line, and I don't know if that's I don't collect toys, I don't follow toys very much, but that would be tempting, especially if they made this little personal smart rocket. I would be all over it.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would look like a period toy that they would make, definitely. Right. Yeah. But no, this is, and I like every aspect of this piece. But I did like the, just as a chapter splash, I love the kill OMAC. I thought the word kill was done really well. I know I couldn't really crop it to show it off, but if people want to go look in your CAF gallery, they can see it better. But yeah, just great stuff here. I mean, it's beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah, no, like I said, and I've owned a couple of New Gods pages. I think both of them I think I've had were inked by Coletta, and I traded them too soon. And that's the business we're in, and the collecting thing that we all have those stories. Exactly. But like I said, I never super warmed up to it. I have a nice it might be in the gallery. I think I have a nice Hunger Dogs page, which is cool. But again, it was all about the art of OMAC. I was intrigued by the whole futurist approach to things. Mm-hmm. And Commandi, it's funny. I know Commandi, there are certain professionals in our industry, that's their favorite Kirby thing, period, Marvel or GC. And it took me a while to get past the cover of issue 1 because I felt like it was just a little too derivative of Planet of the Apes. But what's hilarious is I found out that there's at least a dozen different science fiction magazines and books that use that whole ruined Statue of Liberty thing. So why shouldn't Jack do it?
Sure, exactly.
And I loved, and as I warmed up to the book, I love the fact that all the animals had evolved. So the one Commandi page I had has gorillas and tigers on it, which is cool.
Mm-hmm. And well, let's move on, because everybody was mentioning Darwin Cook, obviously, when we were looking at the Michael Cho, and so we get to go take a look at a piece by Darwin Cook right here, a classic Kirby image, of course, which we know the original sold not too long ago on Heritage for a huge sum of money.
Yeah, I don't remember what the sum was, but it was certainly out of my league.
Yes, out of most people's league, but yeah, what a cool thing. I mean, what was the was this something that you worked out with Darwin, or
No, so Darwin. So this is not a, it's not the technical definition of commission where somebody says, "Hey, Darwin, would you do this?" It basically, while Darwin was working on his Parker series for us, he was basically like taking breaks and relaxing by doing recreations and other things just to kind of like reset his mind a little bit, is what he said. He told Scott and I think pretty much the same story separately. So, this was just something he did. And of course, Darwin did not do a lot of Marvel work professionally, which is a shame. I would love to have seen there was a sort of an idea floating around for a New Frontier type story over at Marvel, but it never came to fruition for a lot of reasons. It is a recreation. Darwin made a few slight modifications. The most noticeable one to the published image is the eyes. Darwin's eyes of Captain America are looking at you, whereas Chick Stone's are kind of looking more down at. And I haven't think those are that Captain America run that Chick inked, is that's my favorite stuff that he ever inked. I just think they're great. But I like the few touches that Darwin brought to this, and I mean it's dead on. And of course, Darwin won an award for, or maybe more than one, for just lettering. So this is like everything is like hand done here. It's just it's just terrific, and I love I loved his lettering. He was one of those artists who the lettering just enhanced what he did. You can see that in Parker, and you can see that in the other stuff too. So
very, very true. And Dino looked it up for me, and I actually pulled it up as well. So there you go, 630K, and that's with the juice, of course. I think it was where it was at. It was like 540, and then with the buyer's premium, went to that. But either way, that's a lot of money. That's for that image. But classic.
That's a nice vacation condo somewhere. So if you close in, you can see those eyes. It's just
so I wanted to zoom in on that and then switch back to this one. There we go.
Yeah. So, and there are other touches all over the place, but Darwin wanted to be respectful at the same time, kind of add his own thing. And this idea of Captain America jumping through the glass has been ripped off and homaged by many, many artists. I owned actually a piece that Ron Garney did that was the same, basically like from the 2000s. That was this image, or late 90s.
Mm-hmm. Well, Darwin did a pretty darn good job on that one. We're going to switch back into take another look at a piece of art from Neil Adams, this time from Strange Adventures, issue 210.
Yeah, and I think when I got back into art collecting in that 2006-07 timeframe, I think this was the first Neil piece that I bought. I could be wrong. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I just, a lot of Dead Man pages don't feature dead men in costume because obviously the motif of the character is that he can inhabit anyone or most anyone. And so you just have this great action page where, Dead Man's inhabited this, this civilian, this crook, for whatever you want to call him. Yeah, chonk indeed, Rich Denny's. Absolutely. This is everything you want in Neil Adams. This is just, it's got all that dynamic action and the realistic, the realistic faces, the realistic, it's just realism. And nowadays, if that same image had been drawn in the top left, there'd be blood and teeth coming out of the guy's face. But it was 1968 or so. So And this page I actually did have so I did get Neil to sign this one, which is good.
That's great. And, you know, the panel layouts, you know, exactly what you'd want from a piece by him during this period. He really came up with some of the most interesting panel designs, you know, as far as the structure and layout of anybody, at least during that time. He was doing a lot of experimenting.
I agree. And what I like about this is it still does what it's supposed to do, which is tell the story. There's a few experiments that he tried, which were just basically a little too wild and less, you know, more about form over function, for lack of a word, you know, but here they're working together, and just the design and the composition, the camera angles, everything is just, you know, everything is just great. So yeah. I agree with number one Marvel fan on that. The camera angles are perfect.
Very true, and it's cool. That was the piece that kind of brought you back into collecting. And
definitely one of them. Yeah.
Marcus said, "Will this be in the artist edition?"
Scott is going to scan it, so that you know, yeah, I hope so. I know it's you know, that and the Lois Lane, and I think one or two others.
Cool. Yeah, I know they're very excited to have gotten the, you know, DC rights and everything. That was a long journey, I think, to getting to that point.
I'm going to respect some of my friends who are former DC colleagues and not tell that story, because
but I haven't heard it either. I
will tell you, the journey is much longer than anyone would possibly realize. And you know, God bless Scott for just being so persistent.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely for him sticking through all the effort. But no, we're going to get some great books out of it, though. Artist editions are going to be, you know, you always wondered and waited, you know, for this to happen. I'm excited for it, and I'm not even
I don't even publish them anymore, and I'm excited for it.
Let's see. This next one's a little shifting gears to something different. We got Jack Davis piece, which is just gorgeous. I mean, the blacks in this thing are, I'd love to own this page. It's just, it's perfect.
This is, I agree with you. That's the only way I can describe it, is perfect. You know, all art is an illusion, right? That's the whole point is, you know, making us see something that isn't really there. And this, if you were talking to somebody about this concept, this is the page you show them, because the illumination comes from the negative space that Jack put no inks on. And I look at this every time I see this page, I am absolutely fascinated that somebody can create lighting with ink and negative space. It's insane. It's just insane. And coincidentally, I did not buy it for this reason. I bought it for the reason I just discussed. But Stonewall Jackson and I have the same birthday. One of us is born many years earlier. So.
Yes, I would assume so. But no, I mean, this is the moment I saw this piece, it was just like, because I've never owned anything by Jack Davis, and he's one of those guys. You know, anything I've seen, I just haven't seen the right piece yet. But to see something like this is the kind of stuff that belongs in a museum. It's why comic art is so important.
I agree. That is you know, Jack Davis is one of the great commercial illustrators. Forget about comics for a minute, of the 20th century, and that's Stonewall Jackson. I agree with you, and I have some other nice Davis pages, but that's a museum page, and I bought that locally. Jamie Newbold from Southern California Comics happened to have it up one day when I was in his shop, and I wouldn't leave until we figured out what he was going to sell it to me for.
Well, very, very wise of you. I mean, because we as collectors don't get to have the opportunity to own pieces where you could say that one, you know, should be in the Smithsonian or somewhere. One day it needs to be in a place of prominence, and that one definitely does. And there's a lot of great Jack Davis art out there, particularly you know, in the like title pages or, you know, chapter pieces, especially when you get you know, hand lettered stuff. I mean, all of that, it just adds to the feel of the era. But Jack's art was just seen. It was just everywhere, it felt like. I mean, I don't know, that you're so lucky to own that piece.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I like I said, I love it. It's an illusion. It's where he chose to put the ink and where he chose to leave the negative space. And my brain can't even process how you figure that out. It's crazy.
All right, now here is what do we got? Pete Poplaski, Batman Silver Age Daily wraparound covers. What was this from?
So another thing where we had to be tenacious with DC was getting the rights to reprint their newspaper comic strips. And so Kitchen Sink had started them back in the 90s, and then when Kitchen was no longer publishing, they kind of went away. And it was always my goal to get as much of it published as we humanly can. And we had the Library of American Comics imprint, which was Dean Mulaney's imprint, published through us. And Dean said he'd be more than happy to do the DC characters if we could get the rights. He thought he could find some of the materials. We thought we could find some of the rest. And Batman, we were able to complete. Pete Poplaski, who is a lesser known underground artist and should be more known, but and is a good friend of Robert Crumb's. Pete was one of those guys that can recreate styles. And so Pete had done the original Kitchen Sink covers and was willing to do our covers when we got the rights. So we did a ton of Superman. We did 3 Batman volumes. And this is the 3rd Batman volume. And this is a wraparound cover. And Pete works large. So this cover is nearly 4 foot, about 3.5 feet wide.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, it's insane. This channels all my, again, the Michael Cho Batman channels my kind of like 80-page reprints of the 50s Batman and all the different Batmen. And then this channel's just sort of like, okay, here's all the 60s sort of Batman TV characters and a few extras like, Man Bat and what have you. And I love this so much. And again, it's huge.
I mean, how do you put it in a portfolio?
You can so basically he does it on 2 boards and then tapes them together.
Oh, good. Okay.
You can fold it and put it in an 18 by 24. It's been in a pile of stuff that needs to be framed for, I confess, for too long a time. So
yeah, I think that's a piece you'd want to see every day.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Oh man, let's see. What do we have next here? Next up is it's a Kirby FF. Wow.
Yeah, my only Marvel Kirby piece. This is right when Fantastic Four was getting into what I consider to be kind of like the prime period of issues like 39 to 75, and this is early in that run. I know the Vinnie Coletta haters out there will notice that this is Coletta inks and not Joe. Based on what I can see, I think, except for possibly some of the equipment in the background in panel 3, I think pretty much, and who knows, maybe he blacked out some stuff behind Sue. I think it looks better with the nice dark black ink back there. She pops a little bit, but in any event, I love the piece. I love Reed doing the slingshot.
Yes.
I just think, I think that is just like, using his powers actually as a power. Because I always think of him, whenever I think of Reed Richards in the Kirby era, I think of him standing in front of some crazy giant machine doing something like scientific. There's not enough of this sort of like creative, he wraps around people a lot. There's not sort of this creative kind of craziness. It's just great. It's a great page from a Frightful Four crossover where the Thing goes to the dark side for a while. It was just I feel like I may have missed the boat on getting any additional Marvel Kirby pages, just because I paid what I thought was a really high price at the time, and now all the stuff has just gone way higher, of course. So
yeah, exactly. So is it the 4th panel that sold you on this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's awesome because, you know, a lot of times it's something as small as that, right? Where it really is something on the page that just, and it's, you know, it's not like it's a splash page. It's just the inventiveness of the character, and it's something you just don't see too often. I mean, I was
Right.
drawn to that immediately when I looked at the piece. And you sent
Yeah,
me the
I
link.
mean,
That's
it's
it.
nice because it's a four panel page, so Jack's got breathing room, and it's just, you know, it's just the fourth panel. I mean, it's all, you know, it's all interesting, but uh, uh, yeah, it's good, and just sort of that little, just like the aiming eye on Reed's face. I just love that. Like,
Yep. Well, he's done it before. That's, you know, this might be the first time we see him do it in a comic book, but you can tell he's at
he's
least
done. He's come up with that trick before. Yeah, good
uh,
deal.
yep. Now we got a nice John Buscema Savage Sword of Conan piece. Just
Yeah,
gorgeous.
just a, you know, 3/4 or 2/3 splash, and it's the end page, and, you know, it's sort of the, you know, the battle's over, and it's like this, you know,
The
spoils
spoils
of
of
war.
victory.
Yeah, spoils of victory. She's willing. So you know, it's just a fun, you know, it's fun page, a little adult the way her vest is laying on her chest, but you know, it's oh, good question from Steve. I don't remember if this is Bob McLeod or not. I don't know if I don't know if I identified the inker in my calf. I don't think it
No.
is, but it's also I'm pretty sure it's not. I don't remember who it is. Maybe it's, I don't know.
I'll see if I can do a quick search. But no, I mean, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm actually on, you know, I should put a link into to the blog that you guys say.
Yeah, that'd be great if you.
Yeah. Let me put it into the chat right now, just so people have it. I'll make sure I link in the description over to it as well. But this is like a write up that you did on this particular piece.
Right. Yeah. So about 4 years ago, I started this blog just to sort of discuss art pieces, you know, things I own, why I like them, what I think works. And I was very ambitious in the beginning of the blog. I've just since gotten a lot of just bandwidth things pulling me in different directions, but it's there, and it's got more. My calf just hasn't caught up to my blog. So, and the blog search tool is pretty good. So if there's an artist you like and you search it, you'll find either any piece by that artist or any reference I've made to that artist in some of the other blogs. So Lee Harmon says multiple inkers are credited here. It's weird. I don't remember offhand who I thought it was or who I said it was.
Oh yeah, actually, okay, yeah. Just got to the part in your blog post. You said Ernie Chan, Tom Palmer, and Bob McLeod are all credited as potential inkers on that issue. So, and unlike a lot of collectors who've been in the hobby a long time, I am not good at picking out inkers.
It could have been a situation where multiples worked on multiple on the same page rather. So I mean, I've got, you know, I do have a Krusty Bunker page from a Savage Tales that Gil penciled and Neil and a whole bunch of other people inked. So it's not
Right.
And I could see a little bit of Tom Palmer on the woman's face. So maybe it's Tom and Bob. Maybe, I don't know. It's nope. As Steve says, not Palmer, but look at that face again. Also, not Plamer either.
Oh, I like this next piece here too. This is we got a John Byrne, a page from Jurassic Park. That's right.
Yeah. So this is a very special page to me because it is a gift from John, and it was unexpected. We published a lot of John's comic book work prior to him kind of doing the X-Men. We don't call, I don't know, we call that fan art. I don't know what we call the X-Men project that he's been working on the last couple of years, but in any event, we did a bunch of Star Trek comics. We brought the X-Men back. We asked John to do one of our Jurassic Park series, and visiting him during New York Comic Con one year, he asked if I wanted to pick something out from the pile, and I found this. I couldn't believe it, that he had not given it to what's his face, Jim, to sell, or it just was still around. And so yeah, it's great. The John's approach to these dinosaurs makes me think of Sauron from X-Men.
Oh yeah,
like he's like channeling them clearly, which is just is just great. But this is the double page spread that ends, I think, the first issue, and it's just it's just not going anywhere. It's just such a great page, and I don't remember. And it's got a Gronk on it because we were talking about sound effects, and I don't remember what specifically. I don't know if the Gronk is on the published page or not, but yeah, he Gronked me. So
I'm looking at it, and no, it is not on the published page.
No, it must be something. It must have been something else we were talking about that day. It was really fun looking at the stuff that John collects and that he owns. Was just, I mean, he's just got a great collection of terrific art. So.
Well, that's an awesome gift. That's for sure.
That was great.
Byrne is one of the artists that I didn't have the opportunity to meet. Well, I've had the opportunity when I was really young, but he used to go out to Mid Ohio, and I'd see him there, but I was too young and scared to go talk to him, and I wasn't an art collector at the time, so I wouldn't have known what to talk to him about other than just gushing over him being one of my favorite artists.
Yeah, and that's that's fair. I mean, it's just right. It's just at that 72 con, I met Alex Toth, and I didn't know Alex Toth's comic book work, but I sure knew he created Space Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and those other Hanna-Barbera animated things. So, so I had something to say. Wow, that stuff's really great.
Yeah.
So,
well, I just always remember him having a long line, even back then.
Byrne,
yeah.
I mean, so it wasn't the Mid Ohio con where the melodrama that kept John away from shows for a long time happened.
I think it might have. I mean, I don't remember which year. The one year I just distinctly remember it was. I think it was '84, and he was sitting next to Frank Miller. And I just remember nobody at Frank's table and just a mob around John's. And
no, this was something that happened in the '90s, I think. But I also think it
later.
Yeah, I think it was in Mid Ohio. Anyway, we were fortunate enough to bring him back for a couple of conventions. I think primarily because he wanted to hang out with Bill Shatner. But whatever the reason was, that was okay by us. And
heck yeah,
it's all good.
Oh yeah, nope. I've asked Jim Warden if I could ever get him on the channel sometime, and it probably will never happen.
No, I don't think it will, but it'll be great. Like
it doesn't hurt to ask, right?
It doesn't. So
I remember I think when we did the first comic art, the first virtual show, I went to Jim Warden probably first, and I pitched him on the idea, and I think the response I got back was, I'll watch what you do the first time, and I'll let you know if I want to, for a subsequent one. And I never followed back with him. He probably didn't like it anyway, but that was the answer that I got from Jim. And so, yeah, I didn't follow back, but that would have been cool at any rate. Let's see. Now here's a piece of art from somebody we've already seen, but again, this is a great Parker Page, Darwin Cook, of course. I mean, this is just again, it's back to just a single color with the black and white. I mean, nobody did it like Darwin did. This is
from the short story that won an Eisner, and I'm having a senior moment in terms of the title of the story. It'll come to me, I'm sure, before we're done. And it's one of the few Parkers where he did it at full size instead of doing two on a page. So the majority of the Parker graphic novels are actually horizontal 11 by 17 pages, but with 2 pages on them. And there was at the Comic-Con that this came up for sale at, he gave it to Albert. I wanted to try and buy the whole story. There was just a lot of confusion. And Darwin was being pulled in a lot of different directions at that particular con, as he always was. So it ultimately, the safe thing to do was make sure I got the page I wanted from the story, and I did. So,
well, you chose well, and I was going to ask you about that because I know most of the Parker pages are 2 pages per 11 by 17. So it's so unique to see
Right.
one that was done full 11 by 17. And I think it was from the 7th.
Thank you. I think that's right. That's right. Yes. And again, you were talking earlier, we're looking at Michael's stuff about, using a second color. I mean, this is all hand done. And I think probably some people who've seen the printed books who haven't seen Darwin's original art don't realize, he picked a particular shade for each story and went with that shade through the story. And so we really lost one of the most talented people of our generation, or I should say of that generation, when he passed away way too soon. Just brilliant stuff.
Well, I don't think you'll find anybody disagreeing with you on that statement. I mean, especially with his peers, right? I mean, I haven't met a single artist who doesn't talk, about Darwin, that knew him and knew his and respected his art, and they all say the same thing. I mean,
yeah, and he's, in terms of comic book output, he's ended up being sort of a modern version of Steranko in many ways. There's just not enough of it. There's just not. We didn't get to see, like I said, that Marvel version of New Frontier. We never got to see that. So.
Very true. Just imagine what that would have been like.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's see. Well, here's a classic Marvel storyline. So we've got Perez Rubenstein Infinity Gauntlet page.
Yeah. Just just what I always wanted in George Perez is just, multiple characters. Just, it's just like, okay, how many fights and characters can I jam into one page? I don't know I just don't know how he did it. I really don't. And I like everything about this page, but there's something about, and this would be Jim Starlin as opposed to George or Joe, but the Warlock beaming in and saying what transpires here is just great. That sums up most of comic books, right? It's just like what transpires here.
And nobody in the room is surprised that this just happened.
Right. It's just like, just perfect. Spider-Man Spider Sense is going off a little bit. But I mean, just what I love about, and again, going back to Jim, but George could handle this art is, this is what would happen if you put all these characters in a room. They'd just be like arguing and fighting and debating. And, you're going to try and put Dr. Doom and Thor and Iron Man and Spider-Man together or what?
Right. And Cap's questioning whether or not Doom, is going to fit into the whole team aspect of everything. Yeah. I mean, it's just a fantastic page.
And George had such a good innate sense of composition. I mean, I love, Doom is looking into the characters. Spidey is looking into Warlock beaming in, Thor and Iron Man up in the top left, just kind of looking at the action on the other side. It's all great. I do love this page. And if I have it signed by George, but if I'm willing to take it out of a frame, I can get it signed by Jim and Joe. I just haven't decided if I'm willing to take it out or not yet. So
decisions. I mean, exactly. I think by and large, once people get into the frame, they typically don't take it out, right? But
typically,
I've done it a few times.
Me too.
Let's see here. Now this one, this is so not Brand Eck page. Right.
Possibly one of my single favorite comic books, certainly Marvel comic books as a kid. Not Branded. This is from Not Branded #1, and I just my 6 or 7 year old brain was processing in just an odd way. It's just like, okay, so the same guys who make the Marvel superheroes make fun of the Marvel superheroes, and so I mean, I love this story. This either appeared right before or right after the Fantasy Masterpieces reprint of the Submariner versus the Human Torch from the Golden Age. And then in that same issue of #1 is Jack Kirby's send up of what I think is one of the best stories in FF from the late, like 57 through 60, where Dr. Doom gets the Surfer's board. And I mean, they're just ability to poke fun at themselves. And of course, other people too, DC and what have you. Not Brannick became one of my favorite comics. And again, this #1, outside the cover, which I don't do, the whole Forbush Man motif didn't do anything for me then, doesn't do anything for me now. But
I never enjoyed it either. But So you have this listed as Ross, Andrew, Bill, Everett as both penciling and Esposito inks.
Yeah. So what the credits are depending on what source you see. Either Bill did the pencils for page 1 of this story in its entirety, with Ross doing some backgrounds, and then Ross finished it, or Bill and Ross did a little bit. Roy's idea, and I talked to Roy Thomas, I talked to him about this, was that, Bill had obviously done the originals, and so he wanted Bill to do the satire, but Everett had some ongoing personal demons, and I think they wasn't able to deliver very much on it. So I don't, depending on Roy's memory and what has since appeared in comics.org and other places, it's not clear to me whether or not Everett did. It looks like certainly, Subby's face on that last panel holding the glass, the partial face, looks, if it's not Everett, it's Andrew just getting it completely right. So it's fun. And again, the Fantasy Masterpieces reprint is right around the same time. So I had just read the original and then saw the same with that FF story that they're making fun of in this issue. It was only a few months after the real arc had concluded. So,
well, it's a great page. And speaking of Chester Gould and Dick Tracy, you get the poster in the first panel. So
yeah, that's right. And by the time they got into the later issues of Not Brenda, every panel was just jam. I mean, a lot of the stories are by Marie Severin, and she was just on fire. She's drawing all kinds. It's almost like she's going back and reading all the old Mad comics and going, "Oh, I can do that." So it's great.
I mean, they were definitely tailored for Marie's sense of humor, and and you could tell she enjoyed it. I mean, she really, really enjoyed working on those.
Yeah, she clearly. I met her at one of those 70s cons. I actually bought one. I think she might have been the first artist I ever bought a piece of art from that I remembered specifically. I bought a prelim to a Daredevil cover, and it's the only piece that didn't go in that group of 30 that I sold, just by accident. So
because it wasn't with them.
That's right.
That's true. She did do a lot of cover prelims, didn't she?
Yeah, and so this is for like Daredevil 87, and the finished is by Sal. But she did it's her composition that Sal did. So
that's awesome. Now, next up, we have a Wally Wood piece here. Let me highlight that. So from Thunder Agents 11.
Yeah, and this is just depending on which source, the Wood checklist or comics.org or a third one, it's clearly Wood was working in a studio, so it was his studio. So Adkins is credited in the layouts some places, some of the pencils. But this is a very Wallace Wood superhero page to me. It's like it's just perfect. These pseudo dynamos are getting mowed down by I forget what the bad guys are called in Thunder Agents. I published them. I should know what they were, but anyway, Thunder Agents as a kid was one of those comics when I would be on the rack and Marvel and DC were, I had read everything, so I'd look at the other publishers, Charlton and Tower and what have you. And because of, guys I like Ditko and Wood and Gil Kane, I often picked these up, even though they were a quarter and they ripped into my budget. So,
well, it's a very nice page. I actually never read Thunder Agents. I hate to say it, but every time I see the art, I enjoy it. I should probably go back and try to at least have a better understanding of what the book was about.
I got the opportunity. So Dynamo's character his secret identity is Len Brown. Not much of a secret identity, he doesn't wear a mask, but that character is named after the co-creator of the Dynamo character, who is Woody's friend Len Brown, who is better known as the creator of the Topps Mars Attacks trading cards. So we're all interconnected here, Bill. It all comes around.
It does.
So.
Oh man, well, this one, an interesting artist pairing. I don't know how often they work together. Gil Kane, George Perez, Jurassic Park cover.
Yeah, and it's my favorites, but probably not for. It's one of my favorites, but not for the right reason. It's my favorites because I worked on Jurassic Park, as I mentioned earlier, and So I have a lot of I have a lot of fondness and affection. I do think Gil and George turned out to be a better pairing than you could imagine. Particularly, I have a bunch of interior pages where you see a lot of great foliage that, Gil clearly just sketched out and George just, really filled in all the details and the dino details, which you can see here. But as I talk about on my blog and have talked about on a Jurassic Park retrospective thing, this is great because talk about seat of your pants. This is neither a T-Rex or a Velociraptor. It's something that Gil, barely looked at some reference clearly and just came up with, if you're a fan of the movie, the kids are menaced by Velociraptors, spoiler alert, 30 years old, at the end of the movie. And a T-Rex grabs the Velociraptor, makes a Velociraptor his lunch, basically. And, I don't remember. And again, everything was, these were monthly comic books. These were being approved by licensors. Spielberg was involved. Again, everything was just slam bang and seat of your pants. And, it's just, it's all crazy stuff. And I just love the fact that this dino is some sort of weird hybrid that, is kind of like, okay, what are we doing here? It's not the scale of the T-Rex, but it's got kind of a weird body, and it even has a patch on it. So clearly we didn't get it approved the first time around. But somehow it's one of the printed covers. The Cockrum cover is on this issue is actually much more reflective of the Sam Neill character is protecting the kids from the approaching velociraptors, who do in fact look like velociraptors. So.
Now, was it your idea to bring Kane and Perez together?
No, that's Jim Salicrup. Most of the editorial decisions came from either Jim or Len Brown.
Okay.
And Jim really had a fondness for the Marvel guys that he'd worked with because he thought they were being underused. And he was right, because the world wanted the Image style in 1992 and 3 and 4. And those were the more modern Marvel artists. So the older Marvel artists were getting kind of, a little discarded, for lack of a better word. And, Jim brought a lot of those guys in to work on the Kirby books, at least on the one shots. Yeah, it was like one of those first, he came into a meeting one day and said, how about Gil Kane and George Perez? And everybody kind of looked around and went, huh? Like, it's just not, you just don't, yes, Nick pointed out, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, that Gil was not getting a ton of work. I think he had finished that second Sword of Adam thing, and his DC stuff was winding down, and he certainly wasn't getting anything from Marvel. And I know that was a big deal, and we were sold enough Jurassic Park comics that Gil and George and Walter, who wrote the book, got a nice chunk of change in royalties.
Well, that's great. Also, good for Jim, right? To be doing that, to recommend
the Kirby one shots. Those artists got more royalties on those books than they had been paid by Marvel in like entire years in some cases. I mean, they were just, that was the comic book right before the comic book implosion. So, people don't realize this, but we, with the 4 titles plus the freebie of the Kirby one shots in April of 1993, we shipped 1 million books. I can't even say that number without smiling anymore.
That's incredible, isn't it?
I know, it's nuts.
Wow. That's hard to imagine. I mean, given the state of the market today and everything, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Let's see. We got 2 more pieces to look at. One is on your CAF, and one is not on your CAF. So we'll take a look at the one that isn't. And this is a recent pickup.
No, it actually just so Berkeley Breathitt has been very generous with me and some of the other folks at IDW and associates, and this was the first piece I got from him, and the only one that I had scanned. They're oversized, so it's the only one I had scanned correctly, and so it's the only one that made it into my CAF, and probably the only one I've ever blogged about either. It's just it's a terrific strip. The a lot of times the sort of the title panel is a stat. This is hand drawn, and it's a Star Wars theme. So even though it's kind of more about AT&T, so it's just great. And like I said, he was, I appreciate his generosity. At some point, I will have to take something out of a frame and shoot it or scan it, but there's another thing that I have from him that I will just never part with. And then there's another Sunday that just was that's just also another great one that I've got to figure out where the color file is and do the right thing on it. So yeah, it's just he's great, terrifically talented guy and a really nice guy.
Well, Bloom County was always one of my favorite strips, even when I didn't understand it. Or I didn't get the humor in it. I love the art. I mean, it was so revolutionary to me in a comic strip, right? When it came out, it was like seeing Bill Sienkiewicz art for the first time in a comic.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Sienkiewicz, because like Bill, it's interesting to watch Berkeley's style evolve. Like particularly, we published the complete Blue County is like this oversized volume, but it's easier to see the strips in the 5 hardcovers, which I think are now coming out in soft covers, if I'm following it correctly. But his art evolved. He'll be the first to tell you that he particularly felt those early strips were very primitive. And then the later strips, some of them have a real surreal quality to it. I mean, just, for lack of a better word, I would say, unlike Larson or Warson, because all 3 of those guys, their strips ran about the same time. It's pretty much, all in the 80s. And you really see, I mean, not that those guys didn't improve too, but you really see differences in the 1988 and 89 Bloom counties versus the 1981 and 82 Bloom counties.
I'll have to go back and look. I mean, but that's one of my favorite strips during that period.
Yeah, me too. By the way, just dialing back for 1 second, Nick brought up the fact that we did those trading cards with the comic books. That's a whole entire video chat, because that was also wild, and we had to do the poly bags, and some people really hated the poly bags, and so getting the production where we could get the cards in time to get them bagged with these comic books. I don't know what we were thinking, other than we were a trading card company, but we added weeks and weeks to our production and deadline time. It's crazy.
That's why you were apologizing for the deadlines earlier, right?
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Well, when you're learning on the go, I mean, you can't really predict your deadlines, and you're trying to be a little bit revolutionary, which the time definitely that was what the 90s were all about, right? I mean, trying to come up with ways to be creative. And
well, we did. I mean, in all seriousness, as the leader in trading cards, we felt an obligation to sort of do something with our comic book line that was revolved around trading cards, and both categories had sort of exploded in just the previous couple of years. So we were trying to do, and look, Topps started a comic book line shortly after Marvel bought Fleer Skybox. So or bought Fleer, and then I think they bought Skybox later on. But what you see where there was the idea that, okay, it's all printing, it's all collectible, how can we merge them together? We gave up on a lot of it, because at the end of the day, we were trying to make comics that people want to read, as opposed to buying things they want to collect. So
right. So no, that makes a lot of sense. And Greg, I can tell that we could easily have you on to another show where we outline just a couple topics from your career. We could probably talk.
Happy. I actually thought, it's funny, I thought about shooting you back a recommendation that maybe we do one where I only talk about pieces that I published, or I worked with the company when we published them, because that actually you'd end up with a few more like that, Gil and George.
No, I think that'd be great. I mean, clearly there's a lot more stories that we could go through.
Yeah, some of them are even true. And I think you have two. I think you have 2 pieces. You have the one I emailed you earlier, and the other. So you have 2 that are not in my cap, I think.
Let's see here. Maybe I have it wrong, but I do have one. I have another one queued up here. Let me go ahead and switch over to that one here.
Okay.
Rosetta remark on this one. This one.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorites. And I only bought it probably 6 or 7 years ago. I was the underbidder on 4 different versions of this, and at that point, you just raise the white flag, and you go, okay, I've got to figure out a way to buy this. And what basically this is the Russ Cochran EC Weird Science Fantasy, although it had been an original Buck Rogers cover that was rejected, and Frank and Bill Gaines turned it into wait, I'm sorry, it's actually Incredible Science Fiction, I think at that point it had just switched from, I think, Weird Science Fantasy to ISF. But in any event, Russ commissioned Frank to do 50 of these remarks, each one hand-colored Doc Martin inks. And Frank got bored and he didn't finish it. So I've heard the number that he finished is somewhere in the 30s. But this was just when I was discovering, these came out in 72, 73, and this was just when I was discovering ECs and learn, the EC convention and the reprints, the Nostalgia Press, and then Bill Hershison's company, and then ultimately Gemstone. But this was whatever the price was that Russ had put on this. If anybody knows, please put it in the comments. But whatever price Russ had put on it was way out of my, it could have been $25, $50, whatever it was out of my price range. So the fact that I can own it now is as an adult, it's just kind of this weird, it's just this weird thing, because I was in love with Frazetta. I bought those Conan, I read Conan only because they were Frazetta covers. I mean, I enjoyed them. Ultimately, I'm glad I read those Conan Lancer books, but they had those crazy Frazetta covers on them, and I was fascinated by everything that that guy had done. And some of the remarks have a Frazetta sexy girl on them, which is cool. This might be slightly less appealing, a couple of percentage points less, but beautiful coloring. It was actually, so the way I can trace the provenance of this is Heritage had it, Albert bought it, and then I bought it from Albert, and I was fortunate that I got it at a reasonable price. But I think one of the reasons it didn't go for a super high price in either case was because the matting on it by the previous owner was just really kind of like substandard, bad color choice. And so I just had it rematted and then framed nicely. But never scanned it. So if I wanted to put it in my CAF, I'd have to use the old Heritage scan, I think. So,
well, I mean, so was this first Frazetta, or have you owned other Frazettas?
I've had one of those. I've had one of his sketches, and I feel like I've had something else from him that's not super. I had a Johnny Comet, which I sold. I'll probably buy another Johnny Comet at some point. And Emre, that's really funny. Remarkable. I guess that's Antoine Dennison. I want to make sure I quote the right. Yeah, remarkable. That is very good. I'm going to use that. That's excellent.
And I didn't make a slide for this next one because I didn't actually scroll all the way to the bottom of that one email, but I can present it because I have the image here. And this one isn't on your CAF.
Not yet. Probably I'm going to do. I think the blog will do an X-Men retrospective, and then when I start putting those X-Men on the blog, I'll start putting them on CAF.
Well, we were just talking about, the Neil Adams layouts and everything. I mean, this is, I'm a huge X-Men fan, and I've always felt, I want a Neil Adams page one day. I better do it sooner. I'm never going to be able to afford one.
Well, I was saying that, and I loved Kree Skrull War. So an event, like if you said to me, sort of Grail page would probably be an Avengers Neil Adams page, although some of those page layouts are a little bit too experimental for my taste. But this is again, this sort of fits in that, okay, here's some great storytelling with great camera angles and nicely designed, before it goes a little too wild. And I wanted an X-Men page with either Sauron or the Sentinel. So I ended up with Sauron's, yeah, I mean, it's got three of the X-Men on it. By the way, somebody earlier when we were talking about, when I made the Sauron comment for John Byrne's Jurassic piece, somebody was talking about Byrne being influenced or really, enjoying this Neil Adams period. And I think a really underrated series that John did is X-Men: The Hidden Years, which is those 18 or 19 issues. I think they're finally coming out in an omnibus. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's already out. But he drew it and Tom Palmer inked it, and it looks like just a continuation of these. So it's basically if X-Men had kept going after issue 66,
right?
I mean, John clearly was, he was full on Adams in these issues, and it just looks like it's a continuation of these stories, which are just, these are wild. Clearly X-Men wasn't selling because Stan was letting Roy and either Steranko or Winsor Smith or Neil Adams just do whatever the heck they wanted.
Right. And it still didn't work.
And it still didn't work. So they did the last issue. They got that great Sal cover on issue. I can't remember if he did the interiors too of issue 66 with the X-Men fighting the Hulk in Las Vegas.
I know, and even battling the Hulk, it still couldn't save.
Yeah, well, at that point, I guess they probably had made up their mind. Okay, this is it. So.
But I mean, I'm envious of this page. I mean, if I, because I'm not a huge fan of like the Kirby's X-Men, but if I could get one page from his run, it would be from issue 10 when he, in the Savage Land. Just great stuff there, and. But yeah, and this one, I mean, with Sauron, I think I probably, as much as I love the Sentinel issues, because there's like 3 of them, right? I think with Neil Adams, I think the Sauron one was my favorite. So, congrats.
Well, thank you.
This would be a grail for me.
And if you ever see a good Sentinel page, just you get it, and then just come back to me about the Sauron. So
yeah, well,
no problem. So.
Congrats on getting that one. That is amazing. Absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah, that was I picked that up last year and was shocked at myself when I wrote the check for it. And I was just like, okay, again, you do it now or you never do it. And how few, with Rob and the other collectors driving up the prices of the Byrne X-Men, there's more Byrne X-Men than there is Neil Adams X-Men.
Exactly.
In terms of available art. It's probably a 3-to-1 ratio, certainly at least a 2-to-1 ratio. And you see those prices on the Byrne pages and you go, okay, they're great. And I love John, but obviously, because I have a bunch of his stuff in my gallery, but this is a much tougher page to get.
It is. Yeah, without question. I mean, I had Neil in my top 5 X-Men artists when we did a debate one time. I know everybody kind of scoffed at me. He only did, 6 or 7 issues or whatever it was. But to me, it just left that big of an impression on me. I just felt like we were fortunate to have him on an X-Men book at the peak of his career.
I think you need to send those people that scoffed at you my way, because I need to have a little chat with them, because there's no question about it.
I know, but I think it's the length of the run, right? I mean, it was so short, but for me, I mean, we were, again, I think I said it, that same thing that night. I was like, we were so lucky to have Neil Adams at that point in his career, having worked on the X-Men, because I mean, he could have been on any book, and that was the book he was on. I mean, my favorite book of all time, and that was, I mean, so it was.
Yeah, I appreciate your love for the X-Men, because that whole book, even pre the artist I mentioned earlier, that just seemed like the Wild West over. It's like you never know who was going to be doing. It's like, wait, is this Arnold Drake over here? What are they doing with this?
I actually put Werner Roth as my number 6 pick. Because we only picked 5, and I said if I had to pick a 6, it'd be Werner Roth for slugging his way through all those goofy stories, and leading up to the the Strankos and the Smiths and the
I mean, right.
I actually have a Werner Roth piece I'll be opening up on Thursday night.
Nice.
Right there, because I got my first Werner Roth at Heroes, because I've always wanted one. and I could never find a good page because
It's
they're just so
they're
blah.
hard and they're overwritten. They're
They
like
were.
they're like you see one in Heritage and you're like, okay, but it's 90% word balloons and 10% art. What am I going to do with those? Just it's just,
Exactly. That was
so
the
is this Warner Roth? This is an X-Men page,
This is yeah, Warner Roth X-Men page. That'll
and
be
you got it at HeroesCon.
I got it after San Diego, actually.
Oh, okay.
And the other one I got was a Heroes from Bashara, which was um, priced right. It was from the Death of Professor X issue. It has them in front of the tombstone, the whole team. And
Oh,
yeah, I
nice.
mean, just a really, I was like, I find, because, Warner Roth stuff, if it has any of the team in costume, usually goes for like $4,000 or $5,000. And I was yet to find a $4,000 or $5,000 page that I felt was worth, was worth getting. And so the Bashara's piece was very affordably priced. Nobody's in costume. And I was happy. Now this one is in costume, and it was in that 4 to 5 range, but it was definitely worth it. So
well, that's great. Yeah, I keep, again, like you, my eye goes to them because I'd like to own a large art X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at them, but I never find the ones I like are just always a little bit more than I want to spend on Warner Roth.
Yep.
Exactly.
Like, that's right? It's been like for me for 10 years. I was so, and now I have 2.
Did he draw the issue 45, the Quicksilver crossover?
I'm not sure on that.
I haven't seen, like, that would be a pay, because I remember buying that issue because Quicksilver was in it. Like, I didn't buy all the X-Men. I tried to buy the ones, I think that might have been one of them that had those origin stories in the back of the individual characters when they were, I guess those were like little backup features at one point.
Right.
Yeah. So,
yeah, I'm not gonna. My Google powers are not going to work for me while I'm trying to.
Well, we've been going at it for a while, so you might you might be at the end of your Google strength.
Oh, Marcus wants me to show you the color guide I just got.
Okay.
Let's see.
I like Marcus's comment about the fact that clearly Cyclops was a bad leader and that led to the books being canceled.
Well, that's because he knows. I always tell him Cyclops is my favorite X-Men for whatever reason. As a kid, I like the leader, and so yeah, they rib me the whole time, and I get it. I'm just being honest when I say he was my favorite X-Men. Here, I'll go.
Oh wow!
So here.
Yeah, watch your light reflecting on. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a shock to find. I didn't find it. Mr. Berkey contacted me. He's like, Bill, I think I got something you might like. And
yeah, I think so. Who did the colors of that issue?
What's her name? Is it Betty? I'd have to go look at my CAF. Hang on a second. I'll tell you. It's a woman who was married to Chris Claremont for a few years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, Bonnie Wilford.
Okay. So, they name recognition, but that's beautiful. I mean, if you're gonna own a color guide, that's the one to own.
Yep, exactly. So
that's great.
I was thrilled. Very happy to get that because I'll never own the original.
You don't think?
No, I don't think so.
Hey, instead of talking on this right now, we should all be buying the Mega Millions. They probably closed it out. It was $1.5 billion. You could buy all the art you want.
Unbelievable. If I could win that, I would take the time payments. I wouldn't take the lump sum. I'd be like, you know what? I'd rather have the 1.5 billion, and whatever that monthly payment is for the rest of whatever, it's gonna be. I can live off that.
I was gonna say, when you get up to numbers like that, you don't need the lump sum. You can. The only thing is you've got to count on them, being
solvent at that time,
fiscally solvent for 20 years. I don't know if I trust them.
Well, all right, I might.
By the way, real quick shout out. I'm glad Nick and Steve were on and appreciate the comments. But I want to I've said this I think on my blog, Marcus. I do appreciate when I put a page on CAF. I do really appreciate your commentary. I always think it's spot on and interesting. So I'm going to do a little shout out there.
That is true. Marcus is the gem of comic art fans for all the comments he puts out there, and they are almost always. He picks out the thing that makes that page special almost every time, and I agree. I completely agree with you on that one. So I think we've agreed that we're going to need to have you back on, Greg. So maybe kick around some ideas. I like the idea of doing a show all of pieces that you were involved with in terms of the production side of things to get that art to fruition. I think that'd be cool. And we could probably touch on a few other points in your career that would would be tied to the pieces as well. So yeah, let's give it some thought. I mean, I'd love to do another one. This is
okay.
fun.
Well, I appreciate that, Bill. I really enjoyed this. Obviously I've watched a bunch of them. I confess I haven't seen all the previous ones, but I've enjoyed it, and I just enjoy. This is the joy of this of collecting, is interacting with other collectors that that appreciate, whether or not you appreciate what the other person appreciates. You appreciate that they appreciate it. You just
Exactly.
do.
We all have the same passion for it. You may not like the art,
Yeah.
like you like the pieces in your collection, but that's the thing. We all share that bug.
I have a friend. I'm not gonna call out. I'm not even sure he's in CAF. He might be, but I'm not gonna call him out by name. But anyway, his taste tends to run to more like violent, horrific, gory images than mine do. But I love that within that world, he knows exactly, what works and what doesn't. And it's just like I said, it's not my own cup of tea. It's like appreciating a good horror movie, even though that may not be your number one genre.
Mm-hmm. Very true. All right, Greg. Well, again, this was great. Everybody in the chat, thank you so much for making this.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for coming along. We appreciate it.
We certainly do, and we'll be seeing Greg again sometime soon. Now, you've almost made me feel like I should go to Baltimore now.
You need to. So Scott's doing the auction again. Yeah. Anybody who was at Baltimore last year. So, and Bill worked with Scott on the auction. We're bringing the Jack Kirby slideshow back. It's like 1,000 images of Jack Kirby original art. We sold out. I love using this phrase. We sold out Comic-Con 2 years in a row. Whatever the non-Hall H big room is, we had we did it. And Scott and I and Walter are kind of like bringing the band back to do the Kirby slideshow. Hopefully Walter will remember that he agreed to do that. And we have I've got some other interesting stuff cooking. So I'll probably have some art with me if somebody wants to buy or trade. But you need to be there.
Yeah, all right. I feel like I should. I did have a very good time last year.
It's my favorite. It's not take away from any of the other shows, but it's my favorite show because it's so comic centric. So,
all right. Well, I'll let you know. Definitely.
Okay. Good deal.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for hanging with us. We'll see you again soon. Have a good evening, and thanks, Greg. I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it, and look forward to doing another one.
Fantastic.